Hey everybody, Josh Collacchi here once again on RotoCurve.com, here to discuss Week 12 tournament picks on FanDuel. Now, these are the GPPs, or guaranteed prize pools, that you see where they award a lot of money to the top performer of the week, and you see that 18 to 21 to 22, maybe even 25% of entries cash. But these tournaments are meant to be won with upside. You're not going to see very many safe picks here, but you are going to see guys that have potential upside and guys that can put up a big score, because in GPPs and tournaments, that's exactly what we're looking for. So let's move on right away and let's get into the quarterbacks for Week 12 that I like to look at in tournaments. There are two guys here that are relatively cheap considered the matchups and based on the other quarterbacks in the slate. First guy is Brian Hoyer for the Houston Texans at 7,100 against New Orleans. Now, I want to preface this by saying a lot of people have Hoyer in cash games this week, but me personally, I don't like to use guys like that in my cash games, although he does have an excellent matchup, and I think the best matchup you can possibly get for a quarterback. But I hate to use a cliche here, but he is still Brian Hoyer. I would rather spend the money on Marcus Mariota or Carson Palmer. It's really not that much more for Palmer, only $1,000 more, and Mariota is also $100 less. So in cash games, I'd rather use those guys. But in tournaments, I'm looking at the upside only, and that's exactly why I like Brian Hoyer. As we just discussed, he has the top matchup against the Saints. New Orleans has given up over 3,000 yards, almost 3,100 yards, and 28 touchdowns through the air this season in only 10 games. So that's an average game of 308 yards and 2.8 touchdowns, or call it even, say 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's a really good game. That's a top 1% finishers for quarterbacks of all time for games. So considering the Saints are giving up that per game right now, that just gives Hoyer that much of a good matchup. Now, the scary part is about this Saints defense. In the last 3 games, they've given up 14 touchdown passes to quarterbacks named Eli Manning, Marcus Mariota, and Kirk Cousins. Now, no disrespect to 3 of those quarterbacks who have been playing well, but that's not Tom Brady, that's not Aaron Rodgers, or even Drew Brees. These are 3 mid to lower tier quarterbacks that have been able to put up these numbers. Of course, Eli Manning has been good in his career. Mariota is a rookie, and Kirk Cousins has had issues with turnovers. So considering the fact that those 3 have put up 14 touchdown passes in just 3 games, it gives Hoyer that much better of a matchup, and I think he's the top play in tournaments because of the potential upside in the matchup. If you didn't want to go with him, as he will be highly owned, look at a guy named Josh McCown, who plays for Hoyer's old team in the Cleveland Browns. He's just 6,300 against the Ravens. We've all heard the news about Johnny Manziel being benched this week, so Josh McCown is going to be taking over the reins as the starting quarterback, at least for this time being. Of course, we've seen the Browns change their quarterbacks at least 47 times, it seems like, this year. So be sure to keep an eye on that situation. But for this week in particular, it does look like McCown will start. He's going to be very low owned. He's at 5.4% owned in the $2 Thursday to Monday GPP on FanDuel. And just a side note, be sure to check out on Friday mornings. Benny Ricciardi, another writer here at RotoCurve.com, will be posting some FanDuel owned percentages and some reasons why we like some guys that are highly owned or lower owned, and you can use that for your information for tournament picks as well. Now, he's only 5.4% owned, and that means that if you can get him and have him play at a high level, you're going to have a leg up on 94.6% of the field. With everybody on Brian Hoyer and Carson Palmer and guys like that, if you're able to get McCown, who also has a top-tier matchup against the Ravens, you're going to be able to find him to be a big asset for you at just 6,300. The first matchup of the season, McCown threw for almost 460 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Ravens and what ended up being a shootout. So he has proven his success and an upside before, and it's just 6,300. It makes for a decent play. Moving on to running backs, there are 3 guys I like here in tournaments. First guy is TJ Yeldon for the Jaguars at 6,500. Yeldon gets the top matchup for opposing running backs against the Chargers, who have given up the most fantasy points to opposing backs this season. We've seen the Chargers allow fantasy points in bunches to these running backs. Last week we saw them give up a touchdown or a lot of yards to Charkandrick West, and Spencer Ware came in. It seemed like any back that carried the ball for the Chiefs scored a touchdown last week. And the thing with the Chiefs is with West getting hurt, they spread the ball around. That's not going to happen with the Jaguars and Yeldon, who is the feature back. So at 6,500 in a great matchup, he has very good upside considering he has a chance to see 20 or more touches. The thing with Yeldon, though, he is highly owned at over 15% in the $2 GPP on FanDuel. but he still has an upside play as a feature back in a good matchup. So even if you don't want to go with a complete contrarian lineup, 15% isn't that highly owned. So you can still consider him unless you want to go completely contrarian and go with the guys that are 1 or 2% owned. Another guy I like is Chris Ivory this week, the New York Jets at 7,000 against the Miami Dolphins. Ivory's been up and down this season and basically for his entire career, but he's a very talented rusher, and he has a very good matchup this week against the Dolphins. Miami has given up the second most rushing yards in the NFL this season at over 120 yards per game. The only team that has allowed more rushing yards is the Cleveland Browns. Now, the thing with Miami is they've allowed a lot of yards in bunches. Of course, in the first matchup, we saw Chris Ivory run for 166 yards and a touchdown against them. So Ivory has proven the ability to run against Dolphins before, and it could happen again as Miami puts out the same defensive line, and the Jets have had success against them in the past. The third guy here is the highest price guy I want to talk about at running back, and he's also the highest owned back at 25%, is Doug Martin against the Indianapolis Colts. The reason why I like Martin, and a lot of other people like Martin, given his high owned percentage, is he has really good upside. He had 257 yards, I believe, last week. He scored over 22 FanDuel points in 3 games. He has over 30 in 2 games, I believe. So he scores FanDuel points in bunches, and that's exactly what we're going to look for in tournaments because you want a guy with upside. He does have some games of under 7 FanDuel points, under 8 FanDuel points, so I can't trust him in cash games. But at 7,500, I think it's worth taking the risk in your tournaments because he does have that elite upside. Now, his matchup against the Colts makes for an interesting matchup because they have done the same thing as Martin, just on the other side. Meaning they have shut down some running backs, but they've given up some huge games as well. And again, one game against the Saints, they gave up 3 rushing touchdowns, over 40 FanDuel points to opposing running backs. So they have shown that they can give up big games, and Martin has shown that he can notch big games. So if the two combine in a good matchup here for 7,500, you're looking at a guy that could finish with potentially 25 or more FanDuel points. At the running back position, that's exactly what we're going to look for. There's 2 wide receivers that I like that I think you can pair with their quarterbacks if you're looking at playing a stack in GPPs. The first guy is Travis Benjamin for the Cleveland Browns, 5,900 against the Ravens. We talked before about Josh McCown, and the way that these two have hooked up was kind of an interesting theory in the beginning of the season. 6 straight games, the Travis Benjamin had double-digit fantasy points with McCown at quarterback, and since McCown is back this week, that chemistry can kind of be rekindled, and we can hope for a combination of the two of them. You can get them both for 12,200 against the cap. So considering you can get a quarterback receiver matchup in a top matchup against the Ravens, it makes for an interesting play in tournaments. In the first meeting, Benjamin had, I believe, 6 catches for 90 yards against the Ravens. So they have shown success against the Ravens before. The Ravens have struggled a bunch. And considering the fact that both teams are going to be without some of their top playmakers, I know the Ravens are without Justin Forsett and Joe Flacco, this game could end up being a shootout because we've seen these weird things happen before. So I want a piece of that game in tournaments, and that's exactly where I'm going to look at stacking Travis Benjamin with Josh McCown in a few lineups. The other guy is Vincent Jackson, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 6,400 against the Colts. You've heard me talk about before about opposing matchup plays. And what I mean by this is Vincent Jackson is on the same team as Mike Evans, who sees the lion's share of the targets. But the Colts have an excellent cornerback by the name of Vontae Davis, who will likely be shattering Mike Evans. What does that mean? That means Vincent Jackson's going to have one-on-one coverage. And despite being towards the end of his career, he's still a big mismatch at 6'5" and over 230 pounds. He's still one of the fastest players on the field when he's on the field. And he's going to see one-on-one coverage against a slightly below-average cornerback, whoever may be defending him on the other side, because Vontae Davis will be on Mike Evans. The Colts have given up a touchdown pass to opposing receivers in all but 1 game this season. So considering that Vontae Davis will be on Evans and the consistency of the Colts allowing touchdowns, I think that points the direction towards Vincent Jackson because there really isn't many other receivers that catch passes when both Evans and Jackson are in the lineup. So the numbers are pointing in the direction of Vincent Jackson scoring a touchdown. And at 6,400 with the other options at that particular price being higher owned, if he's able to score a touchdown, maybe get 1 long touchdown from Jameis Winston, it could be an interesting play at just $6,400. Moving on to tight end, there's one guy, and as you can see here, two guys I'd like to discuss real quick. And the first one is Gary Barnidge, another Cleveland Browns weapon that you can be launching in your GPPs. Barnidge has proven his elite upside at tight end this season. I know that sounds weird because he was a relative no-name at the beginning of the season, but he scored at least 13 FanDuel points in 7 of his last 8 games. He has 7 receiving touchdowns, which is near the tops of the NFL leaderboard. I believe he's second in tight ends to just Gronkowski and Tyler Eifert. And the one thing about the Ravens is they've been very good against tight ends this season in all but one game. And you may have guessed it, that game came against Gary Barnidge, who caught 8 passes for 139 yards and a touchdown. So considering he's proven his success before, he does have Josh McCown as well, and they have, of course, hooked up for a lot of touchdowns so far this season. So if you didn't want to go with a McCown to Benjamin stack, a McCown to Barnidge stack would make sense as well. One quick note about tight ends. Rob Gronkowski, as you can see here, is only 5% owned. Given his upside and the fact that a lot of people play him a lot every week, you might want to throw him into a few GPP lineups, especially if you're going to have a cheap quarterback or a cheap receiver like we just talked about with the McCown to Benjamin, or even if you have a Hoyer to DeAndre Hopkins and use cheap running backs. You want to see if you can get Gronkowski into a few lineups because although he does have a relatively tough matchup against the Broncos, at just 5% owned, you can't pass on one of the better and elite touchdown catchers we've seen in NFL history. So considering at just 5% owned, he is expensive. If he has one of those games that we've seen him have in the past of 100 yards, 2 or maybe even 3 touchdowns, you're going to have a leg up on the competition at tight end. So be sure to consider that. Thanks for watching. This wraps up this week's video based on GPP picks on FanDuel. Be sure to give us a thumbs up so we can continue to bring you this analysis each and every week. And as always, be sure to check out RotoCurve.com for free tools, more analysis like this. There's a great community of DFS players, so be sure to go over there, check it out, and use everything to your advantage as there's a ton of information on there to make this week and every week a profitable one on FanDuel and NFL DFS. Good luck, everybody.